Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. So if you couldn't guess, our topic for today is bipolar and BDSM, or sexuality, whichever flavor you come in, vanilla or Neapolitan. So what the hell does BDSM have to do with bipolar? First off, most humans have a form of sexuality that involves some type of activity. And this is also recognizing that among us are people that are what they can self-describe as asexual, where they don't necessarily have sexual desires or feelings. They might still long for emotional connection, but that is kind of a different category of sexuality. Here today, we're going to be talking about people that do like to interact in more spicy ways, perhaps with themselves or other people, and let's explore. So the word itself, BDSM, is actually an acronym in a variety of different ways. The BD stands for bondage and discipline, and then the D and the S stand for domination and submission, and then the S and the M also stand for sadism and masochism. So a lot of big words there. What some of them mean are playing around with power as a form of sexuality, whether that be in physical restraints like bondage or psychological like dominating a submissive. Those are other ways of doing things. And then the latter category of getting pleasure from inflicting pain on yourself or someone else, or having the pain be inflicted on you is pleasurable, and it's playing around with pain and the boundary of where pleasure and pain falls together. And so this is not something that everybody talks about all the time. And the reason I bring this up regarding bipolar is that one of the symptoms of mania is increased sexual promiscuity or risk-taking behaviors, and potentially these can include things outside of a person's normal sexual repertoire, or some of the more wild side of them could just get released during the mania. So what this video aims to do is have this discussion now so that if somebody does get manic, you can prepare some sort of safety plan and just set up some structure so that it is more safe when you do get manic and decide to potentially have different sexual partners or do different things than you would normally do. On the flip side, one of the criteria for depression can be decreased libido or sex drive. And I'm hypothesizing that if you can keep your sexual repertoire having quite a bit of variety, even while you're depressed, potentially this can help mitigate some of the effects of the depression and keep your sex life active and help bring a little bit more pleasure and potentially happiness back into your life. So this is the reason we're talking about some of these a little more out there for some people, sexual behaviors and methods of interacting. One thing I learned in literary criticism was the idea of a charmed circle, and that being the vanilla sexuality that we're all brought up with, where potentially it's, the heteronormative male-female, only in the one position of missionary, only used for reproduction, only within marriage, and that's the limited charmed circle. And my contention is, and others contend in the field, that human sexuality is much larger than this small little circle, and it's much larger than what even Freud proposed as the height of human sexuality being the genital stage, and that everything gets concentrated around there. I think we actually have to go back to Freud's earlier concept of polymorphous perversity, and that we have a multiplicity of erogenous zones all throughout our body, including those that are part of the stages of psychosexual development, from the anal to the oral, etc. That these are also important aspects of adult sexuality and not just infant or child sexuality, which is still somewhat controversial to some people, but as one can look if they pay attention, children these days, whether through the culture or of their own awareness, are in touch with sexuality or being sexualized in different ways because of the media. So that's a whole other category. So some more information about BDSM. Let's start with the beginning there of the bondage and the discipline. So some people can like to tie other people up, and they can do that in a variety of different ways. It can be very intricate, it can be very rough. I'm not necessarily an expert from personal experience, just from what I've learned and heard from some other people, from some reading. And then you can also have people that like to be tied up, to have their body constricted in some way, to not have that full power over their own arms and legs, and to potentially be contorted, to be hung from the air. And these can be through ropes or chains or all sorts of different methods of bondage, constriction, etc. Then the domination and the submission, you can take the role of the dom or the sub as the shorthand terms for those. And along that spectrum of power exchange and control, you have sometimes the very extreme version of like a master and slave type of role. You also can have like the sir and the boy, and these are different ways of interacting rather than your everyday mainstream type of relationship. So how this gets carried out in some ways is, perhaps the sir is in charge of the finances and of the environment and of taking care of the boy. And for all extents and purposes, these could be equal age partners, 20s or 40s, or there could be a 40-year-old and a 20-year-old, and gay, straight, lesbian, and they can have this power differential between them. And the boy or the sub can submit to what the master wants or what his rules are, and usually those are set up as a variety of rules, such as when the sir enters the room, the boy will stand up and wait for the word to be said for him to relax, or it can mean waking up early in the morning to make coffee for his sir, and that just being a part of what his submitted state of being entails for him. And hopefully, ideally, getting pleasure out of this in some sort of way that some people like to serve, some people like to be in control, etc. And then the masochism and the sadism, which can get a little more tricky for a lot of people, and some of these are still considered somewhat pathological depending on how far you go with it in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So, masochism. Some people can relate to that with the joy you might get out of popping a pimple, or perhaps like pinching yourself, or going to a scarier movie where something that in some ways is unpleasant is actually pleasurable. So it's like pain on the self. And then sadistic, we as humans seem to have this weird, I don't know, fetish, I want to say, almost use that word, for getting enjoyment out of another's suffering, whether this is through like a voyeuristic way. We like to watch, or we can't turn away from an accident on the road, and part of us is like thankful it's not us. Or it could be something like an enemy of ours suffering a misfortune, and the word I think in German for that is Schadenfreude. And that's a little bit less of an extreme version than, say, enjoying the suffering. It's enjoying the pain, but more just like the misfortune, if I understand it right. I'm not a German expert, but something to throw out there. And again, all of these things to do further research on and discover for yourselves, and also to be mindful with any of these types of activities to, if possible, make it sane, safe, and consensual. And consent being a very important aspect of all of this, that you need partners that are in a state of mind where they are agreeing to do these types of activities to set up a scene, and then to proceed with that scene according to guidelines, potentially having a safe word if they need to stop, and then to actually stop, because consent can be withdrawn. And afterwards, ideally, to also have like some sort of debriefing, like how was that for you? Could I have done this more or different or not at all? And that being a part of all of this. And some of these scenes are lifelong, or just for a period of time. They could be, during a day, for a few hours, and, all different types of duration. Obviously you're not going to necessarily be tied up for the rest of your life, but that it could be, you could be put in a kennel or a cage at night, and that could be a regular ritual, kind of like puppy play being a part of that, and you having a handler, and that being a variation of some of these dynamics. So a lot of this is kind of made popular in large part by the LGBTQ community, and is now starting to become a little bit more mainstream in a lot of ways, which can be seen with the fervor and excitement around 50 Shades of Grey, and the kind of running joke that it's liberating vanilla people to try out, the ice cream counter full of different flavors. And there are definitely problematic things about the portrayal of BDSM type stuff within 50 Shades of Grey. I've not read the book, I only saw one movie, and that's just what I hear from reviews. So, with all of this being said, I thought I would introduce this concept to this community in relationship to bipolar, and again, the hypersexuality or increased promiscuity during mania, and the decreased sex drive during depression, and how these aspects of our being, our sexuality, still comes into play with that. So I'd love to hear more from you, any questions, thoughts, concerns, your own experiences if you're willing to share some of them, and thank you very much. Hi, my name is Matthew Breuer. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist at the Tierney Psychotherapy Group in downtown San Francisco, and I'm currently accepting clients in person or online for anyone throughout the state of California. I'm focusing on working with people that have bipolar, and I also have some experience as a substance use counselor, including particularly with people that use crystal meth, and I also see couples if you're interested in that as well. So I do hope to hear from you if I could be of help. Thank you. Let's talk about sex.